Hello and welcome to episode number 51. This will be a look back at a time when R&B and music as a whole was changing dramatically. There will be a fair amount of text at times on some screens, so I apologize for that if it's too much at moments. People will look back at 2011 as a great time. You had 3 drastically different releases from some of the biggest names in music now. Drake with Take Care, The Weeknd with House of Balloons, and Frank Ocean with Nostalgia Ultra. All of them classics in their own right. To understand Nostalgia Ultra, you have to understand Frank Ocean and who he was. And for that, you gotta learn his history. And yes, so many people have already covered his youth. But there are some things that you may have overlooked, so I'm gonna go over it once more. Christopher Edwin Breaux was born in Long Beach, California and moved to New Orleans, the home of American jazz, at 5 years old. His father left the family at 5 years old, leaving his primary caregivers to be his mum Ketonia and his grandfather Lionel. Frank's nickname Lonnie grew from him, and he would be a large influence on his music. Lionel was a member at the Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. They were both non-profit fellowship groups for recovering addicts to help each other stay clean. And you can see in this Tumblr post that Lionel had a subconscious effect on Frank as well. Frank as a kid used to go to these meetings with him, something he's referenced on a few tracks such as Crack Rock on Channel Orange. The answer to what does suffering mean and how can self-forgiveness can be initiated are just some of the things that young Lonnie was likely exposed to as a child. When in school, he even used to do small-time jobs to pay for studio time, and he started doing this from 12 years old. It was an escape for him. He never cared about the church, where many artists found their love from music such as Party Next Door or Anderson .Paak, and he references how he found the church cold like this in an early Tumblr post. He went to study English at the University of New Orleans, which many people have already covered, and he did this while his mum studied for her masters as well, and he attended every class. As soon as he moved in, Katrina hit, flooding his rented studio, and looters took away most of his items. Now, with $1,100 in his pocket, he decided to leave his family and New Orleans behind to go to the City of Angels, LA, and initially only for 6 weeks, but it ended up being 6 years. He started to make more and more contacts while there and prolonged his stay. He worked at AT&T, Subway, Kinko's, among other places. In 2008, he co-wrote Quickly for John Legend, 3 songs for Brandy Norwood, and in 2008, he co-wrote Bigger for Justin Bieber. By 2009, he'd met Tricky Stewart and gotten a contract from Def Jam, but no real recording opportunity. Some Lonnie Breaux reference tracks and personal tracks can be heard on Unreleased Miscellaneous from this time. Around the same time, he also managed to get on the phone with Tyler the Creator through mutual acquaintances, and through the phone conversations he talks about life and being free. And I think it must have been refreshing to meet someone who doesn't take life seriously, especially when you're constantly being booked for sessions by the same type of corporate people. And so, Lonnie was introduced to the world of Odd Future and their DIY approach, along with their unapologetic method of rap that Frank said freed him and made him revere their irreverence. Keep in mind, he's already well off at this point. He doesn't really need too much more money. By 23, Frank Ocean was born, no longer Christopher Lonnie Breaux, citing Frank Sinatra and Ocean's 11 as inspiration. His principle was to become himself and make his own music on what he stood for, as the promise of Def Jam never came to fruition fast enough for him and his timeline. In 2011, he releases Nostalgia Ultra to his Tumblr, a 10-track project with 4 interludes, speaking on themes about love, discovery, being young and wild, while sampling people like Coldplay and the Eagles, without much auto-tune and without resorting to cliché and throwing references everywhere. You could argue that Nostalgia Ultra was about looking at yourself, quite honestly. Before Nostalgia Ultra, you had artists like Kerry Hilson, Neo and Trey Songz, among others, as what defined R&B. He even mentions them on certain tracks. In a post-Nostalgia Ultra world, you had Khalid, Brent Faiyaz, SZA, Her, and Anderson .Paak helping define R&B. Notice the difference? The various retro video game named interludes contain clicks, rewinding and fast-forward sounds from a cassette player, and are a throwback to his childhood. They lend a personal touch to the mixtape, as opposed to mixtapes of that time that had DJs just dropping their own name. On Dust, for example, he speaks about that transition from him likely falling out with writing for others and being miserable, to then going out, seeing the world with all the wealth he'd accumulated as a songwriter. It's a true understanding of how he realized that authenticity is what makes people want to listen to music, and you could only be authentic if you had meaningful stories to tell in the first place. Novacane is about self-medicating to get over a relationship. LoveCrimes is a playback of romantic failure over Stanley Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut. Swim Good is a foreshadowing debate with yourself about dying. An American Wedding handles what marriages truly are and the complexities of divorce. Now, he's always been unapologetic about his influences, Prince being a notable one, whom he discovered at his mum's friend's house, Jerry's. The ability to sit down and just express yourself as purely as possible without worry from what others thought was always something that he connected with listening to Prince, and Nostalgia Ultra was proof of that. He was himself away from the dynamic of what R&B was at the time. There Will Be Tears on Nostalgia Ultra even references his granddad Lionel, not only showing the impact he had in his father's absence, but the wider perspective of the world that he gained by going to those AA and NA meetings. You can see that in the last line, hide my face, can't let him see me crying. He could even be referencing the people at these meetings. While you could argue Nostalgia Ultra helped pave the way for Channel Orange to really flesh out his originality, Nostalgia Ultra always held the core themes that made him a superstar and differentiated him from others. An interest in non-musical art on LoveCrimes. His production was completely out of the blue for a project of that, sounding more alternative than R&B of the time. He had complex storytelling on Novacane and a heavy use of symbolism in his album art and Swim Good music video. So overall, Nostalgia Ultra was not the perfect Frank Ocean album by any stretch of the means, but what Nostalgia Ultra was a defining moment for him and a defining moment for R&B.